Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 11 of A Spell for Chameleon. So, let's get into it. Chapter 11, Wilderness. Actually, let me figure out where... Okay, 1, 2, okay. Bink woke with his face in sand. Around him lay the inert tentacles of a green monster. He groaned and sat up. Bink! Ooh, excuse me. Fanchon cried gladly, coming across the beach to him. I thought it was night, he said. You've been unconscious. This cave has magic phosphorescence, or maybe it's mundane phosphorescence, since there was some on the rock, too. But it's much brighter here. Trent pumped the water out of you, and I was afraid. What's this? Bink asked, staring at a green tentacle. A kraken seaweed, Trent said. It pulled us out of the drink, intending to consume us, but the vial of elixir broke and killed it. That's all that saved our lives. If the vial had broken earlier, it would have stopped the kraken from catching us, and we all would have drowned later, and we would already have been eaten. A fortuitous coincidence of timing as I have ever experienced. Man, that was a wordy paragraph. A kraken weed, Bink exclaimed. But that's magic. We're back in Xanth, Fanchon said. But I conjecture that the whirlpool drew us down below the effective level of the shield, Trent said. We passed under it. Perhaps the presence of the elixir helped. A freak accident, and I'm certainly not going to try to reverse that route now. I lost my breathing apparatus on the way in. Lucky I got a good dose of oxygen first. We're in Xanth to stay. I guess so, Bink said dazedly. He had gradually become accustomed to the notion of spending the rest of his life in Mundania. It was hard to abandon that dear expectation so suddenly. But why did you save me, once the elixir was gone? It was the decent thing to do, the magician said. I realize you will not appreciate such a notion from my lips, but I can offer no better rationale at the moment. I never had any personal animus against you. In fact, I rather admired your fortitude and personal ethical code. You can go your way now, and I'll go mine. Bink pondered. He was faced with a new, unfamiliar reality. Back in Xanth, no longer at war with the evil magician. The more he reviewed the details, the less sense any of it made. Sucked down by a whirlpool through monster-infested waters, through the invisible but deadly shield, to be rescued by a man-eating plant which was coincidentally nullified at precisely the moment required to let them drop safely on this beach. No, he said. I don't believe it. Things just don't happen this way. It does seem as if we were charmed, Fanchon said. Though, why the evil magician should have been included, Trent smiled. Naked, he was fully as impressive as before. Despite his age, he was a fit and powerful man. It does seem ironic that the evil should be saved along with the good. Perhaps human definitions are not always honored by nature. But I, like you, am a realist. I don't pretend to understand how we got here, but I do not question that we are here. Getting to land may be more problematical, however. We are hardly out of danger yet. Bink looked around the cave. Already the air seemed close, though he hoped that was his imagination. There seemed to be no exit except the water through which they had come. In one nook was a pile of clean bones. The refuse of the Kraken. It began to seem less coincidental. What better place for an ocean monster to operate than at the exit to a whirlpool? The sea itself collected the prey, and most of it was killed on the way in by the shield. The Kraken weed had only to save the fresh bodies out of the water, and this highly private cave was ideal for leisurely consumption of the largest living animals. They could be sumption of the largest They could be deposited here on the beach, and even given food, so that they would remain more or less healthy until the Kraken's hunger was sufficient. A pleasant little larder to keep the food fresh and tasty. Any that tried to escape by swimming past the tentacles. Ugh. So the Kraken could have dropped the human trio here, then been hit by the elixir. Instead of split-second timing, it became several-minute timing. Still a coincidence, but a much less extreme one. Fanchon was squatting by the water, flicking dry leaves into it. The leaves had to be from past seasons of the Kraken weed. Why it needed them here with no sunlight, Bink didn't understand. Maybe it had been a regular plant before it turned to magic, or its ancestors had been regular and it still had not entirely adapted, or maybe the leaves had some other purpose. There was a great deal yet to be understood about nature. At any rate, Fanchon was floating the leaves on the water, and why she wasted her time that way was similarly opaque. She saw him looking. "I'm tracking surface currents," she said. "See? The water is moving that way. There has to be an exit under that wall." Bink was impressed again with her intelligence. Every time he caught her doing something stupid, it turned out to be the opposite. She was an ordinary, if ugly girl, but she had a mind that functioned efficiently. She had plotted their escape from the pit, and their subsequent strategy, and it had nullified Trent's program of conquest. Now she was at it again. Too bad her appearance fell down. "Of course," Trent agreed. "The Kraken can't live in stagnant water. It needs a constant flow. That brings in its food supply and carries away its wastes. We have an exit. If it leads to the surface quickly enough and does not pass through the shield again." Bink didn't like it. "Suppose we dive into that current and it carries us a mile underwater before it comes out. We'd drown." "My friend," Trent said, "I have been pondering that very dilemma. We cannot be rescued by my sailors because we are obviously beyond the shield. I do not like to gamble on either the current or what we may discover within it. Yet it seems we must eventually do so. For we cannot remain here indefinitely." Something twitched. Bink looked and saw one green tentacle writhing. "The Kraken's reviving," he exclaimed. "It isn't dead." "Uh-oh," Trent said. "The elixir has thinned out in the current and dispatched. The magic is returning. I had thought that concentration would be fatal to a magic creature, but apparently not." Fanchon watched the tentacles. Now others were quivering. "I think we'd better get out of here," she said. "Soon." "But we don't dare plunge into the water without knowing where it goes," Bink objected. "We must be well below the surface. I'd rather stay here and fight than drown." "I propose we declare a truce between us until we get free," Trent said. "The elixir is gone, and we cannot go back the way we came from Mundania. We shall probably have to cooperate to get out of here, and in the present situation, we really have no quarrel." Fanchon didn't trust him. "So we help you get out. So then the truce ends and you change us into gnats. Since we're inside Xanth, we'll never be able to change back again." Trent snapped his fingers. "Stupid of me to forget. Thank you for reminding me. I can use my magic now to get us out." He looked at the quivering green tentacles. Of course, I'll have to wait until all the elixir is gone, for it voids my magic too. That means the Kraken will be fully recovered. I can't transform it, because its main body is too far away. The tentacles lifted. "Bink, dive for it," Fanchon cried. "We don't want to be caught between the Kraken and the evil magician." She plunged into the water. The issue had been forced. She was right. The Kraken would eat them, or the magician would transform them. Right now, while the lingering elixir blunted both threats, was the time to escape. Still, he would have hesitated. If Fanchon had not already taken action, if she drowned, there would be no one on his side. Bink charged across the sand, tripped over a tentacle, and sprawled. Reacting automatically, the tentacle wrapped itself around his leg. The leaves glued themselves to his flesh with little sucking noises. Trent drew his sword and strode toward him. Bink grabbed a handful of sand and threw it at the magician, but it was ineffective. Then Trent's sword slashed down and severed the tentacle. "You're in no danger from me, Bink," the magician said. "Swim, if you wish." Bink scrambled up and dived into the water, taking a deep breath. He saw Fanchon's feet kicking ahead of him as she swam down, and saw the dark tube of the nether exit. It terrified him, and he balked. His head popped through the surface. There was Trent, standing on the beach, parrying the converging tentacles with his sword, fighting off the coils of the monster. The man was the very picture of heroism. Yet the moment the combat was over, Trent would be a more dangerous monster than the Kraken. Bink decided. He took a new breath and dived again. This time he stroked right into the somber eye and felt the current take him. Now there was no turning back. The tunnel opened out almost immediately into another glowing cavern. Bink had gained on Fanchon, and their heads broke the surface almost together. Probably she had been more cautious about navigating the exit. Heads turned their way. Human heads on human torsos. Very nice feminine ones. Their faces were elfin. Their tresses flowering in magical irradiance over slender bare shoulders and perfectly erect breasts. But the lower quarters merged into fishes' tails. These were mermaids. "What are you doing in our cave?" one of the maids cried indignantly. "Just passing through," Bink said. Naturally, mermaids spoke the common language of Xanth. He would not have thought anything of it, and Trent not remarked on how Xanth language merged with all mundane languages. Magic operated in so many ways. "Tell us the shortest way to the surface." "That way," one said, pointing left. "That way," another said, pointing right. "No, that way," a third cried, pointing straight up. There was a burst of girlish laughter. Several mermaids plunged into the waters, tails flashing, and swam toward Bink. In a moment he was surrounded. Up close, the creatures were even prettier than from afar. Each one had a perfect complexion, resulting from the natural action of the water, and their breasts floated somewhat, making them seem fuller. Maybe he had been exposed to Fanchon too long. The sight of all this loveliness gave him strange sensations of excitement and nostalgia. If he could grab them all at once. But no, they were mermaids. Not this type at all. Not his type at all. They paid no attention to Fanchon. "He's a man!" one cried, meaning Bink was human, not merman. "Look at his split legs! No tail at all!" Suddenly, they were diving under to view his legs. Bink, naked, found this distinctly awkward. They began to put their hands on him, kneading the unfamiliar musculature of his legs, a great curiosity to them. Yet why weren't they looking at Fanchon's legs too? There seemed to be more mischief than curiosity here. Trent's head broke the water behind them. Mermaids, he commented. We'll get nothing from them. So it seemed. It also seemed that the magician could not be avoided. I think we'd better make the truce, Bink said to Fanchon. We have to extend some trust sometime. She looked at the mermaids, then at Trent. Very well, she said ungraciously. For what it's worth, which isn't much. A sensible decision, Trent said. Our long-range objectives may differ, but our short-range one matches. Survival. See, here come the Tritons. As he spoke, a group of mermen appeared, swimming in from another passage. This seemed to be a labyrinth of caves and water-filled apertures. Ho! A Triton cried, brandishing his trident. Skewer! The mermaids screamed playfully and dived out of sight. Bink avoided Fanchon's gaze. The ladies had been having entirely too much fun with him, and obviously not because of his split legs. Too many to fight, Trent said. The elixir is gone. With your acquiescence under our truce, I will change you both into fish or perhaps reptiles, so that you can escape. However, how will we change back? Fanchon demanded. That is the key. I cannot change myself. Therefore, you will have to rescue me, or remain transformed. So we shall survive together or suffer apart. Fair enough? She looked at the Tritons, who were swimming determinedly toward the three, surrounding them, tridents raised. They did not look all that playful. This was obviously a gang of bullies showing off for the applauding spectators, the mermaids, who had now reappeared on shore, taking time to put on a flashy show. Why not change them into fish? That would abate the immediate threat. Could I get them all in time? Trent agreed. But it still would not free us from the cave. I suspect we shall have to resort to magic on ourselves at some point, regardless. And we are intruders in their cave. There is a certain propriety ethic. All right, she cried, as a Triton heaved his three-pointed fork. Do it your way. Suddenly, she was a monster, one of the worst Bink had seen. She had a huge greenish sheath around her torso, from which arms, legs, head, and tail projected. Her feet were webbed, and her head was like that of a serpent. The Triton's fork struck the Fanchon's monster's shell and bounced off. Suddenly, Bink saw the sense of the transformation. This monster was invulnerable. Sea turtle, Trent murmured. Mundane, harmless, normally. But the merfolk don't know that. I've made a study of non-magical creatures and have developed much respect for them. Oops! Another trident was flying. Then Bink was also a sea turtle. Suddenly, he was completely comfortable in the water, and he had no fear of the prolonged spears. If one came at his face, he would simply pull in his head. It would not retract all the way, but the armor of the shell around it would intercept almost anything. Something tugged at his carapace. Bink started to dive, trying to dislodge it, then realized in his reptilian brain that this was something that had to be tolerated. Not a friend, but an ally, for now. So he dived, but allowed the dragging weight to persist. Bink stroked slowly but powerfully for the underwater passage. The other turtle had already entered it. Bink didn't worry about air. He knew he could hold his breath for as long as it took. It did not take long. This passage slanted up to the surface. Bink could see the moon as he broke through. The storm had abated. Abruptly, he was human again, and swimming was harder. Why did you change me back? He asked. Weren't you to shore yet? No, we weren't to shore yet. When you are a turtle, you have the brain of a turtle, and the instincts of a turtle, Trent explained. Otherwise, you would not be able to survive as a turtle. Too long, and you might forget you ever were a man. If you headed out to sea, I might not be able to catch you, and so would never be able to change you back. Justin Tree remained his human mind, Bink pointed out. Justin Tree? One of the men you changed into trees in the North Village. His talent was throwing his voice. Oh, I remember now. He was a special case. I made him into a sapient tree. Really a man in tree form, not a true tree. I can do that when I put my mind to it. For a tree, it can work. But a turtle needs turtle reflexes to deal with the ocean. Bink didn't follow all that, but he didn't care to debate it. Obviously, cases differed. Then Fanchon reappeared in human form. Well, you honored the truce, she said grudgingly. I didn't really think you would. Reality must intrude sometime, Trent said. What do you mean by that? She demanded. I said, we are not out of danger yet. I believe that is a sea serpent on its way. Bink saw the huge head, and there was no question. The monster had seen them. It was big. The head was a yard across. Maybe the rocks, Bink cried, orienting on the outcropping that marked the exit from the Triton's cave. That thing's a huge, long snake, Fanchon said. It could reach right down into the cave or coil right around the rocks. We can't escape it in this form. I could change you into poisonous jellyfish that the serpent would not eat, Trent said. But you might get lost in the shuffle. It also may not be wise to be transformed more than once a day. I have not been able to verify this during my exile, for obvious reasons, but I am concerned that your systems may suffer a shock each time. Besides which, the monster could still eat you, Fanchon said. You have a very quick mind, Trent agreed equably. Therefore, I shall have to do something I dislike, transform the monster. You don't want to transform the sea serpent? Bink asked, surprised. The thing was now quite close, its small red eyes fixed on the prey. Saliva dripped from its giant teeth. It is merely an innocent creature going about its business, Trent said. We should not enter its waters if we do not wish to participate in its mode of existence. There's a balance of nature, whether magical or mundane, that we should hesitate to interfere with. You have a weird sense of humor, Fanchon said sourly. But I never claimed to understand the nuances of evil magic. If you really want to protect its lifestyle, transform it into a little fish until we get to shore, then transform it back. And hurry! Bink cried. The thing was now looming over them, orienting on its specific targets. That would not work, Trent said. The fish would swim away and be lost. I must be able to identify the particular creature I mean to transform, and it must be within 6 feet of me. However, your suggestion has merit. 6 feet, Bink said. We'll be inside it before we get that close. He was not trying to be funny. The monster's mouth was much larger than it was wide, so that, as it opened to its full aperture, the upper front teeth were a good 12 feet from the lower teeth. Nevertheless, I must operate within my limits, Trent said, unperturbed. The critical region is the head, the seat of identity. When I transform that, the rest naturally follows. If I tried it when only the tail was within range, I would botch the job, so when it tries to take me in its mouth, it comes into my power. What if it goes for one of us first? Fanchon demanded. Suppose we're more than 6 feet from you. I suggest you arrange to be within that radius, Trent said dryly. Hastily, Bink and Fanchon splashed closer to the evil magician. Bink had the distinct impression that even if Trent had no magic, they would have been in his power. He was too self-assured, too competent in his tactics. He knew how to manage people. The sea monster's body convulsed. Its head struck down, teeth leading. Spittle sprayed out from it in obscene little clouds. Fanchon screamed hysterically. Bink felt an instant and pervading terror. That sensation was becoming all too familiar. He simply was no hero. But as the awful jaws closed on them, the sea serpent vanished. In its place fluttered a glowing, brightly colored insect. Trent caught it neatly in one hand and set it on his own hair, where it perched quiveringly. "A love bug," Trent explained. "They are not good flyers, and they hate water. This one will stay close until we emerge from the sea." Now the three swam for shore. It took them some time, for the sea remained choppy and they were tired, but no other creatures bothered them. Apparently no lesser predators intruded on the fishing territory of the sea monster. An understandable attitude, but probably within hours a host of aggressive forms would converge if the sea monster did not return. As Trent had remarked, there was always a balance of nature. The phosphorescence became strong in the shallows. Some of it was from glowing fish flashing in colors to communicate with their respective kinds. Most of it was from the water itself. Washes of pale green, yellow, orange, magic of course, but for what purpose? There was so much Bink saw wherever he went that he did not understand. At the bottom he saw shells, some lighted around the fringes, some glowing in patterns. A few vanished as he passed over them, whether they had become truly invisible or merely doused their lights, as he could not tell. Regardless, they were magic, and that was familiar. Belatedly, he realized that he was glad to be back among the familiar threats of Xanth. Dawn was coming as they reached the beach. The sun pushed up behind the clouds over the jungle and finally burst through to bounce its shafts off the water. It was a thing of marvelous beauty. Bink clung to that concept because his body was numb with fatigue, his brain locked into the torture of moving limbs over and over, on and on. At last, he crawled upon the beach. Fanchon crawled beside him. "Don't stop yet," she said. "We must seek cover, lest other monsters come. From the beach, or jungle." But Trent stood knee-deep in the surf, his sword dangling from his handsome body. He was obviously not as tired as they were. "Return, friend," he said, flicking something into the sea. The sea monster reappeared, its serpentine convulsions much more impressive in the shallow water. Trent had to lift his feet and splash back out of the way, lest he be crushed by a hugely swinging coil. But the monster was not looking for trouble now. It was extremely disgruntled. It gave a single honk of rage, or of anguish, or of mere amazement, and thrashed its way toward deeper pastures. Trent walked up the beach. "It is not fun to be a defenseless love bug when you are accustomed to being the king of the sea," he said. "I hope the creature does not suffer a nervous breakdown." He was not smiling. There was something funny, Bink thought, about a man who liked monsters that well. But of course Trent was the evil magician of the contemporary scene. The man was strangely handsome, mannerly, and erudite, possessed of strength, skill, and courage, but his affinities were to the monsters more than to men. It would be disastrous ever to forget that. Odd that Humphrey the good magician was an ugly little gnome in a forbidding castle, selfishly using the magic to enrich himself, while Trent was the epitome of hero material. The sorceress Iris had seemed lovely and sexy, but was in fact nondescript. Humphrey's good qualities were manifest in his actions, once a person really got to know him, but Trent, so far, had seemed good in both appearance and deed, at least on the purely personal level. If Bink had met him for the first time in the Kraken's cave and hadn't known the man's evil nature, he would never have guessed it. Now Trent strode across the beach, seemingly heartily tired despite the grueling swim. The nascent sunlight touched his hair, turning it bright yellow. He looked in that instant like a god, all that was perfect in man. Again, Bink suffered fatigue confusion, trying to reconcile the man's appearance and recent actions with what he knew to be the man's actual nature, and again finding it so challenging as to be virtually impossible. Some things just had to be taken on faith. "I've got to rest, to sleep," Bink muttered. "I can't tell evil from good right now." Fanchon looked toward Trent. "I know what you mean," she said, shaking her head so that her ratty hair shifted its wet tangles. "Evil has an insidious way about it, and there is some evil in all of us that seeks to dominate. We have to fight it, no matter how tempting it becomes." Trent arrived. "We seem to have made it," he said cheerfully. It certainly is good to be back in Xanth, by whatever freak of fortune. Ironic that you, who sought to arduously to prevent my access, instead facilitated it." "Ironic," Fanchon agreed dully. "I believe this is the coast of the central wilderness region, bounded on the north by the Great Gap. I had not realized we had drifted so far south, but the contour of the land seems definitive. That means we are not yet out of trouble." "Bink's in exile, you're banished, and I'm ugly," Fanchon muttered. "We'll never be out of trouble." "Nevertheless, I believe it would be expedient to extend our truce until we are free of the wilderness," the magician said. Did Trent know something Bink didn't? Bink had no magic, so he would be prey to all the sinister spells of the deep jungle. Fanchon had no apparent magic. Strange. She claimed her exile had been voluntary, not forced. Yet if she really had no magic, she should have been banished too. Anyway, she would have a similar problem. But Trent, with his skills with sword and spell, he should have no reason to fear this region. Fanchon had similar doubts. "As long as you're with us, we're in constant danger of being transformed into toads. I can't see that the wilderness is worse." Trent spread his hands. "I realize you do not trust me, and perhaps you have a reason. I believe your security and mine would be enhanced if we cooperated a little longer. But I shall not force my company on you." He walked south along the beach. "He knows something," Bink said. "He must be leaving us to die, so he can be rid of us without breaking his word." Why should he care about his word?" Fanchon asked. "That would imply he is a man of honor." Bink had no answer. He crawled to the shade and concealment of the nearest tree and collapsed in the downy sward. He had been unconscious during part of the last night, but that was not the same as sleep. He needed genuine rest. When he woke, it was high noon, and he was fixed in place. There was no pain, only some itching, but he couldn't lift his head or hands. They were fastened to the ground by myriad threads, as if the very lawn had... Oh no! In the numbness of fatigue, he had been so careless as to lie in bed of carnivorous grass. The root blades had grown up into his body, infiltrating it so slowly and subtly that it had not disturbed his sleep, and now he was caught. Once he had happened on a patch of the stuff near the north village with an animal skeleton on it. The grass had consumed all the flesh. He had wondered how any creature could have been so stupid as to be trapped by such a thing. Now he knew. He was still breathing, therefore he could still yell. He did so with a certain gusto. "Help!" There was no response. "Fanchon!" he cried. "I'm tied down! The grass is eating me up!" Actually, that was an exaggeration. He was not hurt, merely bound to the ground, but the tendrils continued to grow into him, and soon they would start to feed, drawing the life proteins from his flesh. Still nothing. He realized she would not or could not help him. Probably something had put a sleep spell on her. It was obvious, in retrospect, that there were plenty of deadly threats right here at the edge of the beach. She must have fallen into another. She might be dead already. "Help! Anybody!" he screamed desperately. That was another mistake. All around him in the forest and along the beach, things were stirring. He had advertised his helplessness, and now they were coming to take advantage of it. Had he struggled with the grass in silence, he might have managed in time to work his way free. He had awakened before it was ready for the kill, luckily. Maybe he had tried to turn over in his sleep, and his body had objected to the resistance strongly enough to throw off the stasis spell the grass was applying. If he struggled and failed, his demise, at least, would have been fairly comfortable. Just a slow sinking into eternal sleep. Now, by his noise, he had summoned much less comfortable menaces. He could not see them, but he could hear them. From the nearby tree came a rustle, as of meat-eating squirrels. From the beach came a scrape, as of hungry acid crabs. From the sea came a horrible kind of splashing, as of a small sea monster who had sneaked into the territory of the big sea monster Trent had transformed. Now, this little one struggled to get out of the water and cross to the prey before it was gone. But the most dreadful sound of all was the pound, pound, pound of the footfalls of something deep in the forest, large and far away, but moving extremely rapidly. A shadow fell on him. "Hi!" a shrill voice cried. It was a harpy, cousin to the one he had met on the way back to the North Village. She was every bit as ugly, smelly, and obnoxious, and now she was dangerous. She descended slowly, her talons reaching down, twitching. The other harpy had seen him healthy, so had stayed well out of reach, though she might have descended had he actually drunk from the spring of love. Ugh, this one saw him helpless. She had a human face and human breasts, so was, in that sense, female, like the mermaids. But in lieu of arms, she had great greasy wings, and her body was that of a gross bird. And she was a dirty bird. Not only were her face and breasts grotesquely shaped, grime was caked on them. It was a wonder she could fly at all. Bink had not had the opportunity, or desire, to appreciate the qualities of the prior harpy at close range. Now he had a really excellent nether view. Double ugh. The mermaids had represented much that was lovely in the female form. This harpy was the ugly aspect. She made Fanchon look halfway decent in comparison. At least Fanchon was clean. She dropped on him, claws clutching and unclutching in air, in anticipation of the glob of entrails they were about to rip out of his exposed gut. Some of the nails were broken and jagged. He caught the odor of her, a stink like none he remembered. "Ooh, you big, handsome hunk of meat," she screeched. "You look good enough to eat. I can hardly choose what to take first." And she burst into maniacal laughter. Bink, absolutely horrified, put forth the supreme effort of his life and wrenched one arm free of the grass. Little roots trailed from it, and the separation was painful. He was lying partly on his side, one cheek anchored, so he had a very limited field of vision, but his ears continued to bring him the dreadful news of the threats about him. He struck at the harpy, scaring her off for the moment. She was, of course, a coward. Her character matched her appearance. Her wings fluttered heavily. A soiled feather drifted down. "Ooh, you naughty boy," she screeched. She seemed to be unable to converse in anything less than a screech. Her voice was so harsh as to be almost incomprehensible. "I'll goozle your gizzard for that," and she admitted her horrible cackle again. But now a shadow fell on Bink, from something he could not see, but the outline was awful. He heard heavy breathing, as of some great animal, and smelled its carrion-coated breath, which for the moment overrode the stench of the harpy. It was the thing from the sea, its feet dragging as it hunched forward. It sniffed him, and the other creatures stopped moving in, afraid to stand up to this predator. All except the harpy. She was ready to heap vilification on anything from the safety of the air. "Get away, Argus!" she screeched. "He's mine, all mine, especially his gizzard." And she dropped down again, forgetting Bink's free arm. For once, Bink didn't mind. He could fight off the dirty bird, but this other thing was too much for him. Let her interfere all she wanted. The unseen thing snorted and leaped, passing right over Bink's body with amazing agility. Now he saw it. Body and tail of a large fish, four stout short legs terminating in flippers, tusked head of a boar, no neck. 3 eyes were set along its torso, the middle one set lower than the others. Bink had never seen a monster quite like this before. A land-walking fish. The harpy flew up out of the way just in time, narrowly missing being gored by the thing's semicircular horns. Another stinking feather fell. She screeched some really disgusting insults in her ire and let fly with a gooey dropping. But the monster ignored her and turned to concentrate on Bink. It opened its mouth, and Bink made a fist to punch it in the snout. For what little good that might do, when abruptly it paused, gazing balefully over Bink's shoulder. "Now you'll get it, Argus," the harpy screeched gleefully. "Even a fishy lout like you can't ignore Catoblepas." Bink had never heard of either Argus or Catoblepas, but another quake of deep misgiving went through him. He felt the muzzle of the hidden monster nudge him. It was oddly soft, but such was its power that it ripped him half out of the grass. Then the pig-snouted Argus charged, furious that its meal should be taken away. Bink dropped flat again, letting the slimy flippers pass over him, and their impact dislodged more of his body. He was getting free. The two brutes collided. "Sick 'em, monsters!" the harpy screeched, hovering overhead. In her excitement over this mischief, she let fall another large squishy dropping, which just missed Bink's head. If only he had a rock to throw at her. He sat up. One leg remained anchored, but now he had anchorage to rip out of the clutch of the demon weed. It didn't even hurt this time. He looked at the battling monsters and saw the snake-like hair of the Catoblepas twined around the head of the Argus, gripping it by horns, ears, scales, and eyeballs. Anything available. The body of the Catoblepas was covered with reptilian scales from its gorgon head to its cloven hooves, invulnerable to the attack of the Argus. In overall shape, it was like any quadruped, not all that remarkable, but that deadly writhing prehensile head hair. What a horror. Had he really wanted to return to magic Xanth? He had so conveniently forgotten its uglier aspect. Magic had as much evil as good. Maybe Mundania would really have been better. "Fools!" the harpy cried, seeing Bink loose. "He's getting away!" But the monsters were now enmeshed in their own struggle, and paid her no attention. No doubt the winter would feast on the loser. The winner would feast on the loser, and Bink would be superfluous. Superfluous. She darted down at Bink, forgetting all caution, but he was on his feet now and able to fight. He reached up and caught her by one wing, trying to get his hands around her scrawny throat. He would gladly have strangled her, in a sense, strangling all the meanness of Xanth. But she squawked and fluttered so violently that all he got was a handful of gummy feathers. Bink took advantage of his luck and ran away from the fray. The harpy fluttered after him for a moment, screeching such hideously foul insults that his ears burned, but soon gave up. She had no chance of overcoming him by herself. Harpies were basically carrion feeders and thieves, not hunters. It was their fashion to snatch food from the mouths of others. There was now no sign of the other creatures that had rustled and scraped towards him. They too were predators only of the helpless. Where was Fanchon? Why hadn't she come to help him? She surely must have heard his cries for help, if she still lived. There was no way she could have been unaware of the recent fracas. So this must mean... No. She had to be somewhere. Maybe down by the sea, catching fish out of hearing. She had to be invaluable during the past 2 days, and unswaveringly loyal to the welfare of Xanth. Without her, he could never have escaped the power of the evil magician. For intelligence and personality, she had it all over the other girls he had met. Too bad she wasn't... He saw her, resting against a tree. "Fanchon!" he cried gladly. "Hello, Bink," she said. Now his worry and speculation translated into ire. "Didn't you see me being attacked by those monsters? Didn't you hear?" "I saw. I heard," she said quietly. Bink was baffled and resentful. "Why didn't you help me? You could at least have grabbed a stick or thrown rocks. I was almost eaten alive." "I'm sorry," she said. He took another step toward her. "You're sorry? You just rested here doing nothing and..." He cut off, losing the words to continue. "Maybe if you moved me from the tree," she said. "I'll dump you in the sea," he cried. He strode up to her, leaned over to grab her roughly by the arm, and felt a sudden wash of weakness. Now he understood. The tree had put a lethargy spell on her, and was starting in on him. As with the carnivorous grass, it took time to take full effect. She must have settled here to sleep, as careless in her fatigue as he had been in his, and was now far gone. There was no actual discomfort to alert potential prey, just a slow, insidious draining of vitality, of strength and will, until it all was gone. Very similar to the grass, actually, only this was less tangible. He fought it off. He squatted beside her, sliding his arms under her back and legs. He really wasn't too weak yet, if he acted fast. He started to lift her, and discovered that his squatting posture had given him a false sense of well-being. He could not raise her up. In fact, he wasn't sure he could stand alone. He just wanted to lie down and rest a moment. No, that would be the end. He dared not yield to it. "Sorry I yelled at you," he said. I didn't realize what you were in." "That's all right, Bink. Take it easy." She closed her eyes. He let go of her and backed away on his hands and knees. "Goodbye," she said listlessly, reopening one eye. She was almost done for. He took hold of her feet and pulled. Another surge of weakness came, making the job seem impossible. It was as much emotional as physical. There was no way he could haul her weight. He tried anyway. His stubbornness prevailing over even this magic, but he failed. She was too heavy for him here. He backed farther away, and as he left the environs of the tree, his energy and will returned, but now she was beyond his reach. He stood up and took another step toward her, and lost his strength again, so that he fell to the ground. He would never make it this way. Again he hauled himself back, sweating with the effort of concentration. Were he less stubborn, he would not have gotten this far. "I can't get you out, and I'm only wasting time," he said apologetically. "Maybe I can loop you with a rope." But there was no rope. He walked along the trees of the edge of the jungle and spied a dangling vine. That would do nicely if he could get it loose. He grabbed it in one hand and screamed. The thing writhed in his grasp and looped about his wrist, imprisoning it. More vines dropped from the tree, swinging toward him. This was a land kraken, a variant of the tangle tree. He was still being fatally careless, walking directly into traps that should never have fooled him. Bink dropped, yanking on the vine with his full weight. It stretched to accommodate him, twining more tightly about his arm. But now he spied a pointed bit of bone on the ground, remnant of prior prey. He swept it up with his free hand and poked at the vine with it, puncturing it. Thick orange sap welled out. The whole tree shivered. There was a high kneeing of pain. Reluctantly, the vine loosened, and he drew his arm free. Another close call. He ran on down the beach, searching for whatever would help him. Maybe a sharp-edged stone to cut off the vine. No, the other vines would get him. Give up that idea. Maybe a long pole? No, similar problem. This peaceful-seeming beach was a morass of danger, really coming alive. Anything and everything was suspect. Then he saw a human body. Trent, sitting cross-legged on the sand, looking at something. It seemed to be a colorful gourd. Maybe he was eating it. Bink paused. Trent could help him. The magician could change the fatigue tree into a salamander and kill it, or at least render it harmless. But Trent himself was a greater long-term threat than the tree. Which should he choose? Well, he would try to negotiate. The known evil of the tree might not be as bad as the uncertain evil of the magician, but it was more immediate. "Trent," he said hesitantly. The man paid him no attention. He continued to stare at his gourd. He did not actually seem to be eating it. What, then, was its fascination? Bink hesitated to provoke the man, but he did not know how long he could afford to wait. Fanchon was slowly dying. At what point would she be too far gone to be revived, even if rescued from the tree? Some risk had to be taken. "Magician Trent," he said more firmly, "I think we should extend the truce. Fanchon is caught and—" He stopped, for the man was still ignoring him. Bink's fear of the magician began to change, much as had his attitude toward Fanchon when he thought she was malingering. It was as if the change of emotion had to be spent one way or another, whatever the cost. "Listen, she's in trouble," he snapped. "Are you going to help or aren't you?" Still Trent paid no attention. Bink, still weary from the rigors of the night and unnerved by his recent experiences, suffered a lapse in sanity. "Damn it, answer me!" he cried, knocking the gourd from the magician's hands. The thing flew 6 feet, landing in the sand and rolling. Trent looked up. There was no sign of anger in his countenance, just mild surprise. "Hello, Bink," he said. "What is your concern?" "My concern?" Bink cried. "I told you 3 times." Trent looked at him, puzzled. "I did not hear you." The magician paused thoughtfully. "In fact, I did not see you arrive. I must have been sleeping, though I had not intended to." "You were sitting here looking at a gourd," Bink said hotly. "Now I remember. I saw it lying on the beach, and it looked intriguing." He broke off, glancing at his shadow. "By the sun, that was an hour ago. Where did the time go?" Bink realized that something was amiss. He went to pick up the gourd. "Hold!" Trent barked. "That's hypnotic." Bink stopped in place. "What?" "Hypnotic. That's a mundane term, meaning it puts you into a trance, a waking sleep. It usually takes some time to do, but of course a magic spell hypnosis could be instant. Don't look too closely at the gourd. Its pretty colors must be intended to attract the eye. Then it has... Yes, I remember now. A peephole. A single glance into its fascinating innards become eternal. Very nice device." "But what's the point?" Bink asked, averting his gaze. "I mean, a gourd can't eat a man." "But the gourd vine might," Trent pointed out. "Or it may be that a quiescent living body might be excellent food for its seeds to grow on. There are wasps in Mundania that sting other creatures, stunning them, and lay their eggs in the bodies. We can be sure it makes some sort of sense." Still, Bink was bemused. "How is it that you, a magician... Magicians are humans too, Bink. We eat, sleep, love, hate, and, I am as vulnerable to magic as you are. I merely have a more potent weapon with which to protect myself. If I wanted to be entirely secure, I would lock myself into a stone castle like my friend Humphrey. My chances of survival in this wilderness would be greatly enhanced by the presence of 1 or 2 alert, loyal companions. This is why I propose the extension of our truce, and I still feel it is a good idea. It is apparent that I need help, even if you don't." He looked at Bink. "Why did you help me just now?" Bink was ashamed to admit the accidental nature of that assistance. "I think we should extend the truce." "Excellent. Does Fanchon agree?" "She needs help now. She is a thrall to a lethargy tree." "Ho ho! Then I shall repay your favor by rescuing the damsel. Then we shall talk of truce." And Trent jumped up. On the way up the beach, Bink pointed out the vine tree, and Trent whipped out his sword and neatly lopped off a length of vine. Again, Bink was reminded of the skill this man had had with his physical weapons. If Trent's magic were taken away entirely, he would still be dangerous. In fact, he had risen to the generalship of an army in Mundania. The vine twisted into shuddering convulsions like a dying serpent, oozing orange sap from the end, but it was now harmless. The tree keened again, cowed. Bink almost felt sorry for it. They took this vine to Fanchon, looped it about her foot, and hauled her unceremoniously away from the tree. So simple with the right equipment. "Now," Trent said briskly as Fanchon slowly recovered her vital energy, "I propose an extended truce between us, until we 3 escape the wilderness of Xanth. We seem to have problems separately." This time, Fanchon acquiesced. And that's the end for today. Next week, we'll see you guys with Chapter 12.